For the final stretch, we have Paul Ruiz of the Ruiz Group, one of the country's top professional coaching teams with us. Paul, thanks so much for joining us. Wow, the timing is perfect. Boy, do we need to talk to someone like you. You know, I was just talking to 4 established, well-known personalities in their fields earlier, for this episode, and even they were caught flat-footed. It's like, this seems to be happening everywhere, right? Around the world, not just in the Philippines. And what is it you think that's hardest for people to process at this point? Is it just the insecurity of a career? I suppose the pandemic even makes it even harder because then there's that health insecurity. This is just the worst time, isn't it?
Well, there's this ongoing thing called suspended grief. This is the one that's most complex. Typically, when you have situations like this, when you're transitioning from work or a career, you don't have to deal with things like death, right? Or an actual threat to you, your body, your physical state, or your home, somebody you love, an elderly that you're taking care of, or children. So the suspended grief is really the one that's complicating a lot of things. They call it, Dave, altostatic stress. It's like a drip.
Altostatic stress. Okay, I'll remember that. The fact is, we're all in this together, some worse than others. How do you know when it's time to pivot? And second is, when is it time to stick it out? Because there's certain cases where I'm going to sit this out, stick it out, and hope for normalization later on. Others can't wait and already pivoting.
The pivot question is a little bit more complex one, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. I guess sustainability is the first. For a lot of people right now, the first question we ask ourselves would be, how long do I have in terms of sustaining what I have? And that means they go through a process of internal and external assessment. This has to be done in a very, compassionate and very pragmatic manner. You count your money, you inventory the resources that you have, you inventory, make a list of the partners, the friends. Steve Blank in the Lean movement calls this an inventory of lifeboats. So there's really such an exercise. You go through that process. And this is difficult, especially for those who have been, successful. They're looking at going forward with very concrete plans. This is a very humbling process to go through. Then there's this discussion that you now have to make with the people that matters the most, which is your family. And then what happens is we ask ourselves, all right, if I can still sustain it, and then the company or the career or the business seems to be riding it out, then probably it's a good opportunity for reinvention rather than really pivot or going out from where you are.
For a lot of people, including those who have been laid off, for example, in my own company, those lifeboats are no longer there.
Right.
What happens?
You do a internal assessment now. What we have from a skill standpoint, reinvention, if lifeboats run out, very clearly, the illustration would connote we jump ship, right? So we essentially just wear whatever lifesaver we have, and typically that's yourself.
But that's panic mode, right? That's not exactly a wise thing to do, to just jump straight into the water.
That's why there's this pragmatic internal and external assessment process. Pardon the jargon, it's really just soul searching, pare. We look inside, we look deep inside, and then we have very transparent conversations with everybody that matters. Then we go out to those who support us, the banks. You go to your business partners, ex-colleagues. So I'm treating it right now for everybody who I'm supporting in this situation really as going back to startup mode rather than panic mode. It's starting up again.
But it's not always that easy to start up, right? For those who have been, let's say, in a career for 20 years, for 15 years, some for even 30, 35 years. How do you start from scratch? That's always the biggest problem.
One client of mine mentioned to me, Paul, the difficulty really is at this age, and I'm 50 and he's around 54. The difficulty, he said, is that changing and learning all again. These two cognitive exercises becomes very difficult because, we got our ego, we got our set range of information that's already stored in us. So it's processed. It's processed. There's a lot of mindful activities that goes into it. There's a lot of internal and external preparation that goes into it. The one advice is really, first, be compassionate to yourself.
A lot of people have been turning to these sideline businesses. Okay, for some it's hard. Like we just talked earlier to some of our guests. Now, some of them are doing it as additional revenue, but really it's also it's for mental health. They need to be occupied, feel productive, feel relevant. But sooner or later, that's not going to be enough to sustain you, right? So, are we saying that at least for the next few months, you're just going to have to take that cut, lifestyle cut, pay cut, and just hunker down? Or do you think you can? People have the fantasy that they can actually bounce back quickly with a different career or a different entrepreneurial project.
All a function of one's mindset, really, no? And mindset for me is driven by our behavior, the actions we actually take. So on one way to look at the question that you posed is this. Yes, it's important that we have activities and routines for our psychological health. Yet at the same time, you want to balance that off with the sustaining our life. So very clearly, there are things now that the world has categorized as non-essential. So I guess this is one lesson I learned: simplification. It doesn't make sense to spend on things that actually will not really be vital for you right now. So for example, you don't have to necessarily sell off every single vinyl record that you have, pare. You don't have to do that because that's important to you. It's vital to you. It gives you pleasure. It gives you fulfillment. Downsize a little bit. Kasi for some people, maybe we're talking in terms of a sustaining year, right? But for a lot of people that I'm working with, the milestones are a lot shorter. They're thinking about week. How do I pay for next week's rent? How do I pay the salaries of my guys for next week? So those contexts will provide you with very different situations.
Let's go back to, okay, fine. I'm sacrificing. I'm doing what I can. I have a little sideline business to bring in a bit of income in the meantime. But let's go long term. The pivot part, okay? The new career part, not the temporary business, but the long term career. How do I determine that? A lot of people say you just have to retool, retrain. They make it sound so simple, right? As if you can just retool and all of a sudden you're back in the market. How do you even start that journey?
Fit is the most important. What I have to what is needed. I also give advice right now, which is a little bit, counterintuitive. I actually tell them, you take advantage of what's going on to actually really find your joy. And then they step back. It's because sometimes a lot of us were doing what we were doing because of convenience. And the comfort of doing that work was just, you got a steady paycheck and it's okay. So now, it's actually a great opportunity for you to really seek out what's important for you. I've talked to executives who suddenly have now become, very engaged and active social media participants. They write, and it gives them joy. And then before you know it, they're suddenly charging a little bit of an entrance fee. So it's going to be a very, should I say, uncomfortable experiment, that pivot. Second, now's the best time to align the values that you really hold on to and what you were really dreaming of with what you're gonna do. And then the last one is the fairness of things. So because if you're really gonna pivot, you also want to understand how it's going to impact everybody. It's not just you, actually.
When we were thinking of this episode, actually, which was a few weeks back, we just wanted to talk to people out there who are retooling themselves, reimagining their careers, coping with career change. And then, of course, this ABS shutdown thing happened. You're very personal, so I want to be personal with you as well. It's like this process is now happening to so many of my colleagues now in the company. Right. Whether it's you've lost your job or the possibility of losing your job. If you were to synthesize everything we've talked about and sit a person in front of you from the company, what would you tell the person?
I'll tell the person to first pause. I'll tell the person to pause, to stop. I'll also tell the person to be nice to himself, herself, in terms of what's going on, the emotions, and to allow it. Talk about it very well. This process is called showing up. We need to help people to show up to what's going on with much compassion, but also with pragmatism. It's not just about a feeling, because there needs to be a behavior that goes with it. And then the next thing I'll do is actually I'll help them through a process called stepping out. I'll go out and ask, from that situation, what are we learning about ourselves? What's valuable? What do we have? What we do not have? And then lastly is, I'll tell the person to, would you consider, I'll invite you to look at this now as your finest time rather than, a really bad time in your life. This could be your finest hour. And that process is, of course, stepping up. And stepping up means aligning to values, everything we talked about, a readiness to reinvent oneself, creating what we call a business model of yourself so that you understand what value you have to offer to the world. And then ultimately, I'd like to help that person go around and go out of himself and start helping others. And in the process, they might just come up with the next best business idea.
Paul Ruiz, thank you so much for your valuable advice. We look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you.